I'm Kevin Davis, and this is the Catholic Family Podcast. I'm joined by my buddy Eric, the Caveman, who's wearing a very nice Avalanche jersey, the world champions of hockey, that is. Yeah, very nice. Very nice. Beautiful. We recently did a show reviewing the Space Trilogy series by C.S. Lewis. This is a program we want to continue on the Catholic Family Podcast, reviewing books and movies that Catholics are likely to watch. So not everything that comes out, just things that might come up or things that we like and enjoy and can recommend. We're not going to do everything we recommend. Some we're going to do that we don't like. But anyway, we're going to do, everything that I guess interests us, and we hope that will interest you as well. So last show, we talked about the series by C.S. Lewis without spoilers. Today is with spoilers. So again, this is with spoilers. If you want to read it and you don't want to, and you want to be surprised by everything that happens, then, well, turn this one off and go back and watch the first one again and order the books.
Like, share,
Correct,
subscribe,
Eric?
and then turn it off.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
And come back later after.
Got to have you on more often. but let's get into it. So Eric, what are we talking about in this second show?
So the second show, my plan was to go through each of the books, very high level, laying out what happens. I think what happens is sort of necessary to really dive into the, I guess, philosophy that Lewis brings to the moral and the allegory of the story. So I think
philosophy is good. I just started a philosophy series with Father McKenna. So
fantastic, by the way. Highly recommend.
Yeah. So if anyone's interested in philosophy, we're going to go into a book, delve into a little philosophical reasoning from this book. So let's go for it. Book number one, I suppose we'll start.
Book number one, Out of the Silent Planet. It deals with the protagonist named Ransom, modeled after J.R.R. Tolkien, who's kidnapped by two villains. And these villains basically fly him to Mars. Throughout the course of the book, the motivation is, learned that there's gold on Mars, like a lot of gold on Mars, and the Martian people don't really care about it. And so these villains are going to try to get as much of it as they can, and they're offering Ransom as sort of a sacrifice for him, like a trade. Because the Martian people, who are, humanoids composed of body and soul, right, in this very Catholic world, but they speak a different language, and so the villains can't speak with them. And it just so happens that this protagonist, Ransom, is a philologist, so he deals with the study of language. So anyway, they kidnap him, they fly him to Mars, and it's sort of an adventure story at that point. Ransom doesn't know anything about the aliens or their planet. He thinks they're gonna kill him. That's why the villains brought him there to be sacrificed. But he escapes, kind of runs away on his own. As he's running through the planet, he realizes kind of how beautiful it is, how ordered it is. He's just kind of taken aback by the niceness, I guess, of the planet. He runs into an alien species and actually becomes friends with one of them. This friend alien takes him to his village and begins to, teach him the ways of his people. And because he's the philologist, he begins to learn their language. Over the course of this, he learns that, there's 3 different species of alien, and they all get along perfectly well on Mars. There's no war, or sickness, or conflict. And, over time, the realization comes that these races on Mars have not fallen, right? There's no original sin, which is very interesting. And in the course of learning the language, he learns, there's no word for evil. There's no word for corrupt, right? It's this language that is sort of untouched, I guess, by original sin.
Interesting.
So, yeah, very interesting. As a part of this, he has a really hard time when he's talking to these alien species to get them to understand, these villains kidnapped me. They wanted to sacrifice me to you so that they can take gold. And they're like, well, why would they want gold? What's the point of gold? And, why would they kidnap you? That's a bad thing. Who does bad things type of thing. It's
it's really interesting because it's something that's come up a lot. The idea that the basic philosophy, that we believe that that we're fallen, that the men are corrupt from their birth, and that's the exact opposite of what the world's telling everybody. The world's telling you that everyone's good and no one is born, bad or, blah, 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 blah. And it really shows when you talk to someone who is not Catholic, you see this immediate disconnect. You like in your arguments, because you have that basic idea of we are born in original sin, and we are
Mm-hmm.
born where we need to do our best in order to reach heaven and to perfect ourselves, rather than we're born perfect, rather. And that's a really so it sounds like a really, really interesting and fruitful discussion for our time.
It is. Yeah. And so I'm just going to kind of skip through most of it, but kind of get to the climax where we can talk a little bit more about the philosophy. So the villains eventually find him. They kill his alien friend and like basically try to run away with him again. When all three of the humans, so there's two villains and then Ransom, they're captured and brought before the Archangel of Mars, right? The Oyarsa, the leader of the whole planet. Because it's an angel, it already knows Ransom is good and from Earth, right? So it takes him aside and kind of speaks with him, like what's going on type of thing. And in this conversation, it's revealed that the Archangel, or the Oyarsa of Earth, has become bent. Bent is the word they use for bad or evil, right? And the illusion here is that the Archangel, or the angel of Earth, was Lucifer, right? The prince of the world.
Interesting.
Very interesting. And because Lucifer, not named that, but obviously that, became bent, now all of Earth and its happenings and history, everything, are hidden from the rest of the solar system. Right. So Mars and Venus talk to each other and everyone's good, but there's this cloud over Earth because it's bent. It's alluded to in the book, but it's not, directly mentioned. But Ransom tells the Oyarsa the story of redemption, right? Particularly the incarnation. And I have a quote here from the book that the Oyarsa of Mars says, "You have shown me more wonders than are known in the whole of heaven." It's kind of a neat little aside, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
Because you figure a planet untouched by original sin, all of its creatures get along, and then they all basically die, go to heaven type of thing.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
Boy,
it's hard. So they're trying to wrap their heads around,
right.
So everyone has gone evil because the prince of the world has gone evil, and God himself came down, became one of you, and it was kind of cool.
I can already hear people complaining about the whole idea, but I think to me it sounds really interesting to just view it from that perspective. I mean, what would have happened? Kind of the what ifs of if Adam and Eve hadn't sinned in the garden. I mean, that's a pretty deep topic. Wow,
it is. It's very deep. And so then anyway, after all that, the villains are brought before in sort of a court with the Oyarsa, and all of the leaders of the alien species of Mars. And because the human villains can't speak the language, Ransom is now the translator. And this is really kind of the crux, I would say, the climax of the book. The main villain kind of gives like a long, really what I would call a progressive humanist speech, which again is impressive that it was written in 1938, but you could hear it being given today. But the kicker is that as Ransom is translating his speech, he doesn't have words for all of these bent concepts, all of these evil concepts. So he's trying to translate it into a language untouched by evil. And what becomes is that all of this, nice sounding words of this progressive speech become just utter nonsense. I have an example here, right? So the main bad guy says, "Life is greater than any system of morality," right? You could hear someone saying that today. But translating that into uncorrupted language, Ransom says, "Living creatures are stronger than the question of whether an act is bent or good," right? And then all of a sudden, that sentence makes no sense,
right? Interesting.
And you could see this in equivalent today, right?
Right.
Gender is a social construct. What does that mean, right? Yeah. I think Ransom would say something like, "What you are isn't really what you are. What you are is what the people around you say you are." And it makes no sense, but just brilliant insight by Lewis.
Interesting.
Well, so, and anyway, that's kind of like what I would call like the point of the book. You can tell this is what Lewis was driving towards. And so the Archangel of Mars says, "Humans are not my responsibility. We'll send them back to Earth," and they get sent back to Earth, and the book ends.
Okay. So. Interesting. Wow, that is. I'm very intrigued. That's That's an extremely interesting topic.
Yeah.
Well,
What are your thoughts? We're at 10 minutes and we have 1/3 of the books done. Do you want to do 3 videos?
let's say since this is, I'm going to break a rule. Since this isn't technically a review,
Okay.
then maybe we'll go. But let's stick to 30. Let's say 30 minutes.
30. I can do that.
All right.
Cool. Any thoughts, questions on the first book?
Intriguing. Really interesting. I think it's and again, because of where we are in our world and how clearly we've lost sense with reality, and part of it, a lot of what you see in the world is propaganda and lies and just twisted words. It sounds extremely relevant. I mean, really relevant. So, and the whole idea of not having original sin. I mean, that's a really interesting concept, because again, it makes it, that's how the world thinks of us, right? The world thinks of people as having never had original sin. So we're all born with this perfect, wonderful, wonderful soul and idea, and it's just not true, and you can see that. And so, but to be able to compare both, maybe that's what some of our modernist friends need to be able to do.
Yeah, and having that contrast for sure.
Totally interesting. Okay, book 2.
Yeah, book 2, Pearlandra. So that book 1 written in 1938. Book 2 is 1943, so there's a little gap there. So the basic story here is that Ransom is tasked by that Oyarsa, that archangel of Mars, with a mission. He's to go to Pearlandra, name of the book, which is Venus, in order to protect it from some kind of attack. And that's all the information he's given. He's given a ship, and he takes it, arrives at the planet, and then there's more adventure, right? So the planet is, he's exploring the planet. It's very beautiful, very pleasant to live in. The water is sweet, the food is everywhere, and it's delicious. It's the Venusian Garden of Eden, basically. And then he runs into someone, the only humanoid, body and soul creature he can find. It's the queen of the planet, and she's referred to through the book as the Green Lady. She's, looks mostly like a lady, but she's green. Anyway, she befriends him and tells him of her situation. She and her husband, her king, are the only 2 inhabitants of Venus, and they live basically carefree lives on rafts. They live on these floating islands and everything that take up the majority of the planet. The only thing that they have to not do, that they're forbidden by God, is to sleep on the fixed land. So, land that's not floating or whatever. So they can walk on it, they can explore it, but they can't sleep on it.
Interesting.
So, tree of paradise,
right?
Equivalent there, pretty thinly veiled. No sooner does all this exposition get given to Ransom than a second starship comes crashing down, and it's piloted by Weston, who was the villain from the first book that was giving that speech. And he's pleasant enough. He says he's changed and everything, but he mostly kind of ignores Ransom, and his only interest is in the Green Lady, and he seems to take a very strange interest in her. The majority of the book then kind of follows, where it's this, what do you call it, theological debate, where Weston pretty quickly is determined to being able to convince her, right? He's trying to convince her to sleep on the fixed land. He's the serpent, so to speak, in this allegory. And Ransom realizes, I guess the reason I was sent here was to prevent that from happening. So the majority of the book is just like debate after debate, and it's a masterclass by C.S. Lewis about, here's the truth, here's the counterpoint, just going at it and stuff. As this happens, as the 2 argue, and this is probably the majority of the book, probably 2/3 of the book is just this back and forth. But throughout the course of it, all of a sudden, Weston, the villain, starts to show like superhuman intelligence, and he starts winning the debate, even though he's lying and telling non-truths. At one point in the book, it's revealed that he's demonically possessed, right? And this reveal is, I'm not very sensitive to such things, but it's pretty scary. So that's that parent's guide section there.
All right, fair enough.
So now Ransom knows what he's up against, right? And as the demon basically begins more and more gaining the upper hand, Ransom kind of finds himself despairing and even angered, right? Like, why would God put me in this position? I can't win this, type of deal. And that's really kind of where the climax of the story comes, right? On the surface, he thinks the battle is for what the Green Lady is going to choose, right? But there's this, again, it probably goes through a whole chapter of just this inner dialogue with Ransom, where he realizes, okay, man, I'm fighting with my whole heart. I'm fighting with my whole soul. I'm fighting with my whole mind. What's left? He realizes his strength, right? Maybe he needs to actually physically attack this thing to keep it away from her. And, he's modeled after Tolkien. He's a small professor. He's not a fighter or everything. And so then there's this very long inner dialogue, which is, again, just really well done by Lewis, where Ransom is, I think this is what I meant to do. I meant to fight this thing. But he's afraid. He doesn't want to. He's like, at some point, what does this have to do with me, right? Earth has already fallen. Why do I care about Venus? And it's just a very beautiful internal dialogue, which ends up sort of revealing that what he is being asked to do isn't actually to, he's not responsible for what the Green Lady chooses. He's responsible for obeying that, that internal command by God to actually just fight this thing. And realizing like, okay, I probably can't win, but this is what I meant to do. This is what I'm going to do. A very Frodo moment, I guess, right? Like, there's no reason to think this is going to work, but it's the only thing I have left. It's the way I think I'm supposed to be going, and so he eventually does it. So that's really what I would call the point and the climax of the book, even though it's 2/3 of the way through.
I mean, again, it sounds extremely relevant because I think you see these days, you see balloons and UFOs and war and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I really think a lot of it is just simply distraction. I mean, it's just a distraction to make us forget ourselves, to think that again, it's all this bigger thing. It's all the end of the world and Trump and Biden and you really do. It's so easy to forget. Wow, it doesn't matter really. I mean, in the end, it's only my soul that matters.
Well, and I think more than that, right? We can't out intellect the devil, right? We know we have the truth and we can base that with reason and logic, but you can't out debate the devil who's, so much more intelligent than us, right? We can't win the battle with YouTube comments, right? What can we do? We can, love God with our whole heart, souls, minds, and strength. And then doing that will have its fruits downstream. Right. That's really kind of, I think, the point of the book.
Interesting. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
At any rate, like after that inner dialogue, he makes the decision, okay, I'm going to do it. And he attacks the possessed Weston, and long and terrible battle. And with the help of God, he wins it. And at one point, he even calls upon the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost in the final battle, which is kind of cool. Not spirit. So again, the Tolkien Catholicism.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, so he defeats and destroys the possessed body, kind of freeing the Green Lady from her temptation. So then the book closes. The lady reunites with the king. They thank Ransom for his role in the victory, and they're set up as the rulers of Venus. And Venus is spared the fall.
Interesting. So, good guy wins. Wow.
Yeah.
Man, when does that happen?
I know. So then, Ransom goes back to Earth, and that's the end of the second book.
Interesting. Yeah. Again, it sounds very relevant. I mean, kind of these, as you say, eternal battles and eternal truths, I suppose, that are relevant in 1943 and relevant now. It's cool. I mean, again, I think it sounds so. I guess though a lot of it's dialogue. Is that something that's going to bore some readers?
Possibly, right? If you're picking it up thinking, so the first book, there's a lot more adventure, right? It's more what you would consider science fiction with truths in it. This one is maybe the first quarter is adventure, and then it just basically goes into this, and it's not, I wouldn't say it's like highfalutin, you need a PhD in philosophy to understand it, right? It's Lewis is very good at, simplifying it down to, the common man's perspective. And I think, the deeper the philosophy, the more you'll get out of it type of deal. But yeah, no, that is a good point. There's a little adventure and then there's a big old battle. But other than those two things, the majority of the book is sort of centered around this philosophical debate. So if that doesn't sound like something you'd like, don't read it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one of those issues, obviously, that a lot of people just don't read books at all these days. But I think that it's a shame because so much more can be taken from a good work of art in terms of a book than from a 2 hour movie, especially if you're watching the Avengers or something where it's just explosions for 2 hours and
Yeah.
you leave and like what was the actual story. At least with this, it seems like it's something that was impactful enough for you that it really kind of sits and it's like you
Mm-hmm.
were able to take, hey, this was meant to be something. So and I'll ask you now, even before we do the third book, what is your feeling about allegory? Because I know that's famously Tolkien does not like allegory, but
Tolkien
clearly
liked
Lewis did.
applicability. Yes.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So allegory, the problem with allegory is you're really taking the opinions in some cases of the writer, and those are sort of woven in more directly to the story,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you're really kind of getting, I don't know, ham-fisted isn't the right word, but you're getting just this, the author, here's what the author thinks, here's what he puts in his
Mm-hmm.
allegory, right? It's more of a one-to-one relationship there. Whereas what Tolkien does with his applicability is you just put these eternal truths really into your stories, right? You're these, I don't know what you'd call them, like overarching themes to
Mm-hmm.
life and the way the world and the universe works, and then you build those into your story. Now anyone from any time, you know uh, you know you and me, we both take away something that is very personal to us, right? So it's not that one-to-one anymore. And
Right.
so when Lewis is on, like, there may be allegories Lewis is making here that are Protestant nature and I just don't understand them, right?
Right.
that's the that's
Right.
that's the difference, and I'm just getting the sort of Catholic allegories out of it. So I think I agree
Interesting.
with Tolkien there, right?
Yeah.
Instead of it being one-to-one and ham-fisted, now it's just, this is based on certain eternal truths, and you can take what you will out of that.
Interesting. Okay, so last book to do the biggest book. Is it possible?
Yes, because I'm going to skip
All
a
right.
lot of it.
Okay.
So the third book is That Hideous Strength, and it was published in 1945. It's very different from the first two. The first two, space travel and different planets, and there's adventure in them. The third one takes place entirely on Earth, and it's more of a dystopia. So it's kind of considered the Christian 1984, it's often called.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it starts with the main protagonist is not Ransom this time. He's sort of a side character, but the main protagonist is named Mark, and he takes a job at this institution. It's the National Institute for Coordinated Experiments, and the acronym is NICE. So that's the first of many prophetic nods to our current day, right? Sketchy government departments and
Mm-hmm.
corporations making cute acronyms. But anyway, he slowly and surely realizes that it's up to no good, right? He tries to find out why they hired him, and he just gets all this nonsense answer. The director of the institute is super sketchy and like goes pages and pages, answering questions without actually saying anything. Um, Also relevant today.
Mm-hmm.
Another character is the chief of the nice police. The institute has its own police force, and the chief of police is nicknamed the Fairy, and she's basically a really butch woman who's heavenly applied to be lesbian. Also,
What?
also relevant for today's world, although she wouldn't be a
Okay.
villain probably.
For sure.
But she's a villain. But anyway, as Mark continues to get worse and worse feelings, at one point, one of his good employee friends like warns him, "Hey, you need to get out of this." And the next day, he's found murdered. Right, so it's kind of it starts very dystopian, like what's going on here, mystery story kind of. Yeah, I guess I kind of have to mention. So that's one sort of realm of the story, and then there's sort of a side plot with Ransom. And so Mark is married, and his wife Jane, like, they're having trouble in their marriage, and she doesn't like that he's working for this sketchy place. And so she goes off and seeks guidance from Ransom. And this is kind of where it gets a little funky. But Ransom is now the heir of King Arthur, which is part of the whatever, the mythology, I guess.
Hey, if
And he
you're writing
runs,
the book, you write in
yeah,
the book. You put
yes,
whatever you
I
want into
guess.
it, right?
And so he's running a small group of people who are in on sort of the whole planetary setup, right? With each of the planets having its own Oyarsa and life and everything. And it's like their goal is to kind of help the Earth, right? Because the Earth is in quarantine. None of the other planets can talk to it or know what's going on with it. And then they discover his little group with Ransom discovered that the reason the Institute has established itself in this little town in England is they're looking for the body of Merlin. And their hope is to find him and deceive him into using his power to help them in their evil purpose. Mm-hmm. So I don't know exactly why he chose to go this way, but it's interesting.
It's interesting.
Interesting Lord of the Rings references too. Like he references Numenor.
Okay.
Which is also interesting. So I don't know if he's trying to tie it into Tolkien's world, but anyway.
Huh.
So that's all kind of going on the side. So the good guys under Ransom are trying to find Merlin before the Institute does, before Nice does. So then back to Mark. Things continue to get sketchier. He realizes what his job is actually to do is to write and promote false narratives in the newspaper, provoking the people of the town to chaos and promoting the takeover from the Nice's police force. Again, sound familiar?
Sounds a bit like 1984. Yeah?
Well, fake news, right? Let's
right.
Get everyone riled up and,
right.
Say government control is the only way to do it. And so he starts to resist. He starts to say, I'm not going to do this. And in that case, they double down and show him, okay, we're going to show you who's actually running this whole organization. And this is also where it gets creepy. They take him down to this laboratory, and he discovers that the leader is actually a severed head of a French scientist that the Nice has brought back to life using science. So it's a really sort of frightening depiction, but it's kept alive through a series of tubes and breathing machines, artificial saliva, and that's actually the head who's running the Institute, the literal head.
Right.
It's later revealed that the head is not actually kept alive by science, but demonically possessed. So if that makes it better or worse, I don't know. So after this reveal, Mark is horrified, tries to escape, and then they capture him and they start initiating him into the inner circle, subjecting him to re-education. And this is his re-education steps are really, for me, the takeaway of this book and sort of the climax of the book. Like one of the initiation steps is they put him in this room that's almost right on, but like the ceiling isn't quite level, the pictures aren't hanging quite straight. Right, the furniture is in awkward positions. Like it's very close to being a normal room, but everything is just slightly off. And basically, he has to come to grips with being okay with that. Mm-hmm. The allegory there being, good is ordered, and even slight, slight changes to that, slight acceptance of things that are even only a little bit off, is sort of the start of a slippery slope. And it's very beautifully written. I can't really speak to how well it's done. And then the last and final initiation, and it's really sort of the crux of the whole book, and it blasts through the allegory and just becomes real world. They put the bad guys put a crucifix on the floor, and his final test is to trample on it. They tell him, you don't even have to believe in it. It doesn't need to mean anything. All you got to do is just, step all over it, and you'll get into the inner circle. And that's the point where Mark, the protagonist, snaps, or, rather doesn't snap. He's like, no, I'm not going to do that. Now, it's interesting because he's not even religious. He's not a Christian or Catholic or anything. Right. But he knows that if people this evil consider this to be the ultimate and final rite of initiation, then this symbol, or what this symbol stands for, must be the ultimate and final good. Mm-hmm. And the inner dialogue that's going on there, right? That's that Chestertonian, the references, or the takeaway I had from it was, again, Vatican II, right? With the room where everything is just slightly off. Vatican II looks like the church, right? They have all the fixings, but it's slightly off here, it's slightly off here, little heresy there, right? That's the crooked room. And then again, like the fact that we brought up in the first podcast, what's the one thing that Vatican II can't stand?
Traditionalism. Yep.
Like the crucifix in this book, right? That must be, it's a validation of what we already know is to be true.
That's really interesting, especially seeing that, again, it comes from someone who is not a Catholic, but universal truths are truths, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, God is order, and that's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
And so is that something that, I mean, that's kind of the end of the book then?
No. So basically, yeah, I'll go through it really quick just so we don't leave on a cliffhanger. But Ransom finds Merlin, and they basically show him like, hey, we're the good guys. Merlin goes into and like basically infiltrates the Nice, pronounces the curse of Babel on them, which makes them all, speak in different languages, not understand each other. And then they were experimenting on a bunch of animals and stuff. And so he releases all the animals, and the animals trample and kill most of the major staff. The three major heads of the Nice escape the animal bloodbath and then go down to the head, where that's when it's revealed that the head isn't actually alive. It's just possessed by a demon. The demon realizes that Merlin is destroying them basically, and so demands sacrifice. And the three heads kill each other. The three leaders kill each other for the head. And then kind of reminiscent of the destruction of the One Ring, all of the earthquakes and stuff happen and swallow up the evil institute and everything. And so Mark escapes and goes back to Ransom and his wife and lives happily ever after. So
the good guy wins again. Wow,
good guy wins again.
Pretty dark.
It is. Yep, it is. Wow. It's a dark book.
I almost wouldn't expect that from C.S. Lewis. I don't know why. I think of him.
Yeah, no, I know. I was surprised, right? The first book was Narnia-ish with maybe some small adult themes, and then the second book was a little bit more, and then the third book was just off the cliff. This is a very adult story.
Interesting. Well, I wonder if that's. I mean, part of that was going through the war and seeing how much darkness he must have lived through. I wonder if that affected his mindset. I mean,
yeah, I don't know.
If you read back to Lord of the Rings to keep going, I mean, if you read all of the books, in order, you can see there was a change in how he wrote. He doesn't sound the same in the first book as he does in the final book, and just literally how he writes and his tone, and it's all much darker, but for a reason too. But I think his life circumstances, and he started writing it 20 years before he finished it or whatever, and that's pretty interesting to see how someone's viewpoint can change and how it can change literally to the pen, right? What they're actually putting down to paper. It's going to make it a bit darker. That's interesting though. But I'm really intrigued. I'm going to have to try to find these books. I looked on eBay. Germany is just harder to find English books, obviously. But I bet in the US that should be pretty easy.
I think so. Yeah. It's a favorite for the, modern Christian conservative people.
Yeah, interesting. I think I maybe had heard of them in passing, but I'd never even given them a thought if I'd heard of them.
So and I think that's how I went into them. And then as soon as I started reading through, I was pretty hooked. And again, for a non-fiction guy, although you hear in my analysis of it, it's really kind of on the fence between fiction and non-fiction at some point.
Right.
So
interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think that's really interesting. We'll have to. I'll be curious if anyone has read them. If anyone wants to read them, leave us a comment. Let us know what you thought of them, or if you're going to buy them. I'd be curious. I mean, I want to buy them now too, and I'll talk to Eric sometime after I've read them and maybe delve a little deeper into the philosophy of it, because I think that's what I always harp back to on this show. If you're going to watch something, be it Disney or Lord of the Rings or whatever, or read something, I think you should always ask why. What am I taking? What the person who wrote this or created this? Why? Why did they do it? What's the intention? And obviously, a lot of times it's just to make money, but almost always there's some sort of moral, because stories usually have some sort of moral. And is it a good moral or is it a bad moral? And boy, it's so many times you watch movies now, and it's just wait, huh? What are they telling me? And I can tell you that's part of why we want to do this series, because I've watched some of these supposedly Catholic movies, or Catholic movies that many families watch, and they're not good. There are obviously morals, and their entire premise, you can tell, is not to glorify God. It's not to help, order, or to boost morality or whatever. It is to, I don't even know, cause confusion or to blaspheme. It's really pretty incredible. And that's something, again, that's why we're doing this series. And it's going to get ugly at times. There's going to be people who really probably don't like our opinions, but you know what?
Well, and that's, I've given my opinion and my takeaways from the book. Someone else may take away something entirely different, right? Someone else may say, no, these really sucked and I didn't get anything out of them. That's fine.
People will
save
say
the
they
world
don't
one YouTube comment at a time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, people say they don't like Lord of the Rings. They couldn't read past the first 10 pages, and I just smack them in the face and say, you're not my friend anymore, because
everyone likes different things, Kevin.
No, some things are not allowed. You're not allowed to not like Tolkien, not on this show at least. Well, Eric, I really appreciate it. We've already run a bit long, but it's been really interesting. And again, I'm seriously intrigued by these books, even though I now know the storylines. I'm still intrigued to read them. I think that's
Mhm.
actually interesting. A lot of the times, if you get the spoilers, it's kind of like, okay, well, there goes that. But actually, I'm actually even more intrigued. I want to read these now. So
Yeah.
thank you for that. And until next time, yeah, until next time. Oh, and everyone, please, again, as Eric said, like, share, subscribe, comment, do all those fun things so that while the channel continues to grow, so that we can reach more people and tell cool, books and philosophy and
Really,
all
this
that
is
fun
just
stuff.
the bait on the end of the hook, right?
That's
Do
exactly
some
right.
worldly book reviews and then bring them to the other videos that are actually important.
You ain't lying. Yep. Amen to that. And again, actually, for anyone again who's interested in that in philosophy, just had a great show. Maybe I'll link to that in this video with Father Stephen McKenna of St. Gertrude the Great, who is a philosophy major, obviously studied philosophy in seminary as well. And the first video, he really just described pretty much what is philosophy itself, and started talking about Socrates, Aristotle, Plato. By the end, my brain was kind of fried, but it was very, very
It was
fantastic stuff. Really
it
good
was amazing.
information,
Yep.
really good stuff. And so go check that out, because again, philosophy is really what's going to help us know how to think and how to make decisions and how to know what is good. So check that out. And yeah, keep checking out this podcast. So Eric, God bless you.
God bless you.